I'm Debbie Colbert, and I'm the director of the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. And some folks like me, it's really kind of hard to believe that we are about to kick off the next budget cycle of development for 2027-29. Many of you know that the state operates on a biennial cycle that goes from July 1 to June 30th, 24-month period. For our agency, we start well in advance of that because we really like to work closely with our many kind of stakeholders and partners on our budget. So today really represents the first kind of formal kickoff, but as you know, we're always in conversation about needs and opportunities and places where folks would like to see kind of the department kind of leaning in different areas. So because we have about 19 people online and about the same in the room, we're going to go ahead and do some introductions, just so that we all, because we're hoping that you'll all be back for the next gathering, and that way you kind of have a sense of who all's engaged, and you know we're all partners together in this. So I'll just turn to maybe Ken. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes.
We'll do the room and then we'll jump online.
Happy to introduce myself. So Ken Lofink, I'm the agency's Chief Operating Officer in the Director's Office. Pleased to be here with you. Like Debbie said, hard to believe 2 years like that. But for me, being internal operations, this is like excitement time, right? Let's go. We're building the next budget. So I'm super pleased to be here. Happy to have you all with us here today. And then before we go online today, I did a quick sound check online. Thumbs up for folks. Can you hear us in the room okay? There we go. We got thumbs up. All right.
Okay. Awesome.
All things go. So thank you so much, and looking forward to chatting with y'all today.
All right, Sean, would you like I think you can stay seated for the introductions, yeah, Sean, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, everyone, and folks online. I'm Sean Clements, the deputy here of the Fish, Wildlife, Habitat Communications Programs. And yeah, I want to get through today, and I'm excited to share some information and some celebrations with you.
Davia?
Hi everybody, Davia Palmieri. I also work in the Director's Office here at ODFW.
Jennifer Taylor, Budget and Economic Services Manager.
Everyone, Kyle Smith, Director of Government Relations for the Nature Conservancy.
Good afternoon, I'm Amy Patrick. I'm here representing Oregon Hunters Association and Oregon Wild Sheep Foundation.
Dave Wiley, representing Oregon Elk Foundation.
Kristen Kittrick with the Coalition of Oregon Interests.
Kirk Blaine with Wild Salmon Center.
How about we go back around with you, Sarah?
Hi, everybody. Sarah Wright, ODFW Habitat Division Administrator.
Ben Westland, the Chief Information Officer here at ODFW. James Spencer, Chief Financial Officer here at ODFW.
Good afternoon. I'm Mike Govan. I'm the West Region Manager for ODFW.
Hey everybody, Tom Stahl. I'm the Deputy Administrator with Inland Fish in ODFW.
Hi, Spencer Sawaski, Habitat Division Deputy.
I'm Mike Harrington. I'm the Fish Division Administrator at ODFW.
I'm Brian Wolfer. I'm the Wildlife Division Deputy Administrator for the department.
And I'm Bernadette Graham-Hudson. I'm the Wildlife Division Administrator here at the department.
We'll go next to online, and Ken is going to actually facilitate us working through folks. But I would just say that, you know, we do have a lot of our agency leadership in this conversation, and that's because we take our responsibilities to manage our financial resources really seriously as an agency. From our perspective, not only is our budget is how we implement our mission, but it's also how we sustain relationships and trust. We take it really seriously, and we hold our kind of fiscal responsibilities as a pretty high bar as an agency. So let's switch to online.
Yeah, you got it. And folks online, I'm just going to call you out alphabetically. We got to make sure folks from the public and also internal to ODFW. So we'll just go down the list, starting with Brian Posowitz.
Hi, everybody. Brian Posowitz for this meeting for Humane Voters of Oregon.
Bill Brignan.
Speaking, I'm Bill Brignan. I am the Program Manager for the Inland Fish Management Group.
Colin Reynolds.
Hi, everyone. Colin Reynolds with Defenders of Wildlife.
Danielle Moser.
Hi everyone, sorry you can't be there. I'm Danielle Moser with Oregon Wild.
Devin Norden,
Hey folks, this is Devin Norton, a contract lobbyist with Trust for Public Lands and Pew Charitable Trust. Good to see you.
Sione Fili Moihala,
Hi, thanks, Ken. Yeah, I'm Sione Filimoyala. I'm the CFO analyst with Natural Resources Agencies.
James Fraser,
Hi everyone, James Fraser with Trout Unlimited.
Jennifer Fairbrother,
Hey folks, Jennifer Fairbrother with Native Fish Society.
Joseph Vale,
Hi there, my name's Joseph Vale. I'm a senior representative with Defenders of Wildlife.
Kimberly Priestley,
Hi everyone, Kimberly Priestley with Water Watch of Oregon.
Chair Mary Wall.
Hi, hello to everybody. Glad there are this many people on, and I look forward to this meeting. Thank you.
Melanie Moon,
Hi, I'm Melanie Moon. I'm with the League of Women Voters.
Nick Myatt,
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Nick Myatt. I'm the ODFW Region Manager for Eastern Oregon.
Sean Miller,
Good afternoon, Sean Miller. I represent the Coastal Conservation Association.
Captain Doug Schugert,
Good afternoon, Doug Shugart, Oregon State Police Fish and Wildlife Division Captain.
Srishti Kamal,
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Srishti. I'm with Western Environmental Law Center.
and Susie Weir,
Hi everyone, I'm Suze Ware and I'm also here with Western Environmental Law Center.
and I think,
Did we get Tim?
oh, and Tim, Oregon Wildlife Foundation.
Hey, Tim Gressitt, the Executive Director of the Oregon Wildlife Foundation.
Welcome. Welcome everyone online. Thank you for joining us. Thank you Chair Wall for being here and Sione. I mean, I take it the fact that our CFO, Sione is here, that we must be his favorite natural resource agency. That's my takeaway, Sione, but you know, we'll just leave it at that. And we were just going around the room introducing ourselves. But
Oh, yeah, hi everyone, I'm James Atkins, Executive Director of the Association of Northwest Steelheaders.
Well, again, thank you all for being here for this kickoff. Today, we're just gonna do a little bit of kind of level setting, just kind of a little bit about the agency so that if you maybe haven't spent as much time working on budgets and working with our agency, just again, kind of who we are, how we do our business, just really quick. Then we're gonna talk a little bit about outlook for the 27-29 state budget bill and ODFW budget bill, like what are revenues looking like? And then gonna talk a little bit about kind of some of what we're expecting in the build out of our budget. There may be a point of like some celebration, spoiler alert, you know, when we get there, you'll know it. But we'll start with kind of just the basics. Ken, are you advancing the slides?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, we just, you know, it's one of those things that you kind of just always start with your principles. And they really, for our agency, these have kind of stood the test of time in terms of how we develop budgets, why we're with all of you today. We don't develop our budget in a vacuum. Never have, never will. And, you know, this is not the only conversation you can have with us, you know. Of course, anytime if you want to talk to us as we are building this budget, we are happy to do one-on-ones. We're happy to come and talk to your groups, you know, just like, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions. We really do try to continuously be kind of like challenging ourselves to think about how we're implementing our program and always be on like continuing improvements. Really trying to make sure that we've got the resources to meet our mission, that we are building a sustainable budget, and that we're being sensitive to the folks that are helping to fund the agency and trying to be extremely transparent in how we build our budget. Next slide. But it really all starts with our mission. And as many of you know, the mission of our agency is to sustain the fish and wildlife and their habitats for future and current generations. Every single word of that mission has meaning. You know, you can't lose any part of it. And again, it's really stood the test of time from our perspective. And you know, as we've gotten more resources as an agency in areas like our habitat division, you know, it's just opened up opportunities for us to lean in even further as we implement our mission. Next slide. Just, this is the least like exciting slide that you'll see today. But while we've got you, we wanted to because I kind of consider many of the folks that engage in our budget to be kind of like our power audience. Like, you know, you're the advanced users of a lot of the policy work that we do as an agency. We have gone through some changes in the last 2 years in terms of how we're organized as an agency. And so just wanted to kind of put this in front of you. In the last 2 years, we've pretty substantially kind of been taking a look at how we do our administration and our kind of internal services. And just really grateful to Ken Loffink, who stepped in, I think within like 24 hours of me becoming director as the acting deputy over this part of the agency, which is our central services. And really, I mean, honestly, we weren't thinking at the time that we were gonna be taking a hard look at our central services, but we had this opportunity and I was like, Ken, this is our chance. And he has spent the last 2 years really evaluating how do we deliver our internal services more efficiently and where do we have pretty significant gaps. And you don't know, but behind that line of boxes is some pretty substantial changes that we've been making over the last 2 years to better deliver those services. And one of the biggest gaps we had was in facilities and property services. And so Ken was able to do a lot of reorganization that was completely budget neutral so that we could carve out a more intentional capacity around our facilities and our properties. We manage within our, you know, across the state, 200,000 acres. We have something like 90 offices, 30 hatcheries. I mean, it's pretty, our footprint is pretty substantial. And that work is getting more and more complex. When you think about like just the facilities we've lost to fires. We don't have a fire season that doesn't involve at least a few evacuations now. And so really trying to kind of have one place where we are thinking about resiliency, readiness, you know, and so we're excited that that was one of the changes that Ken has been able to make. And then deputy director as kind of really the things that you might think of as our agency. It's our fish, wildlife, and habitat divisions, which are centrally organized divisions that kind of set the kind of standards and approaches that we'll use statewide in fish and wildlife and habitat management. And then the bulk of our people actually reside in our east and west region that is kind of our boots on the ground. So we'll talk, next slide. As many of you know, by intention, we are a very decentralized workforce. One of the things that I've learned just in the last few years is that we were one of the first state fish and wildlife agencies to go to a decentralized model for fish and wildlife management, and it's now the norm across the country. So again, we've got 20 wildlife areas that we manage. We've got more than 200,000 acres of land, 32 fish hatcheries, and offices across the state. Some extremely small, some larger. But really, this model is about, you know, as fish and wildlife and habitat, you know, staff, they are living and working in the communities that, you know, they are kind of sustaining these populations and doing voluntary conservation, really as part of the communities themselves. Next slide. The other thing that I just continue to emphasize with folks in terms of kind of like how we do what we do, we are a science-based agency. So recipe that has worked for our agency. We're not a regulatory agency. Many people think of us as setting hunting and fishing regs. That is harvest. That's harvest setting that we do through our commission. But for most of the work on the ground to sustain fish and wildlife populations and to kind of improve or sustain habitat, it is completely reliant on voluntary efforts. So it's landowners that want to work with us on projects. It's landowners that are willing to let us get on their lands to do captures. It's working with our federal public land managers on doing good things on the ground for those lands, and then kind of on ramps through other agencies' regulatory authority. So if a county is making a land use decision, we're providing comments, but in many cases they don't have to listen to us, right? Like we bring expertise, we bring science, and then we're throwing it into the hopper of somebody else's decision process. And so what really differentiates us is that we're trying to bring that science to help inform voluntary efforts, to inform land use decisions. And that's a combination of just a lot of monitoring work that we do across populations. It's also kind of applying that science and continuing to improve. As many of you have heard me say before, the work that we do is not getting any easier or less complex. And so we've really been continuing to lean into just like, how do we get more efficient and accurate with the science that we are delivering that's informing our management decisions. And then we're always in this loop of adaptively managing. So it's kind of, one of the ways you'll hear some of us talk about it, it's like, we're planning, we're improving the knowledge that we have, and then we're taking actions. And then we're kind of, in that loop of like, okay, what did we learn? How do we want to adapt further? Next slide. Okay, that was kind of just making sure everybody was in the same place in terms of just the agency itself and how we do our work. Now we're gonna get right into budget stuff with Ken and talk about the budget build.
Thanks, Debbie.
Any questions before we go into budget build? Please don't hesitate to interrupt.
Yeah.
Like this is a conversation as much as you want to make it a conversation.
Yes, please do. I'm gonna go over, like Debbie said, really take you through our budget development timeline, provide a state of the state, if you will, for the existing biennium, which serves as a starting point for our 27-29 budget development. Go over some outlooks by fund type, for federal funds, general fund, lottery funds, and other funds, and then just kind of tee up what things are looking like for the 27-29 biennium. And I'll just start with the process, right? So we're here today, highlighted in green there, April 7th, budget open house meeting number 1. But the process for developing a budget really started a couple months ago. They started looking at revenue and expenditure projections, working with our executive leadership team on potential policy option package development, and really kind of just slow on the gate, but really intentional about looking at our programs and figuring out what we might want to do within 27-29. Also, in the late winter timeframe is when we received the official budget instructions from DAS. So that happened on March 17th. And that really kind of signifies the kickoff of, okay, it's budget development time. We now, over the next couple of months, have very specific instructions on how it's going to go and what and deadlines and process and all that we have to abide to, that leads us up to ultimately presenting to our commission and having our agency request budget approved by the commission in late June. So starting now, this is really kind of our first chance to discuss the budget with you, go over what we're thinking, what's going on, and have some just discussion along the way. It's not the last time for engagement either. Like Debbie said, our goal is to be very transparent throughout this process. There'll be opportunities to discuss with us along the way. We have our leadership team spread throughout the room and online, and any of us are happy to talk through certain things with you at any time. We have another budget open house scheduled in May 12th, and that's where we'll have things a little bit more finalized with policy option packages, agency reduction plans, and things like that. So that one will be really important. Hope you're all available for that. And then, like I said, all this leading up to June 26th, presenting it to our commission. And I just breezed through that in 5 minutes, and this is a gross oversimplification of what it means to build our budget, right? There's tons of stuff in between. And just shout out to Jennifer Taylor, who's here in the room, our budget manager and her budget team, who really in the background are furiously putting together forms. DAS has a form for everything, right? And so like there's a million forms we have to put together, there's books we have to put together, revenues, expenditures, billing out, current service level. There's a ton of stuff in between here. And you'll notice couple different check-ins that we have with DAS in the governor's office on various concepts that's built into the process going forward. So key deadline is in 10 days on the 17th. All of our preliminary policy option packages are due to the DAS Chief Financial Office, DAS CFO, and the Governor's Office for their review. They're going to review that stuff and ensure that it's, what we put in there is kind of meeting the directions they provided, meeting the vision of the governor for their programs, and just provide that initial check-in. And then the last one is a key deadline at the end of May. That's when we think we'll, I think the DAS gave us a range of like the 16th through the end of the month of when we should receive kind of the final thumbs up on policy option packages to include in our budget. So that will happen at the end of May. So a lot crammed in there, but opportunities to check in throughout. Okay, so when framing up our 27-29 budget development, we have to start with where we are today. And so up on the screen here is our 25-27 approved budget. So this includes adjustments that were just recently made during the 2026 legislative session, and of course includes investments that were made during the 2025 legislative session. So this is fully up to date, inclusive of those adjustments that were just made last month. A couple things I'll point out that have been like front and center in the news and whatnot, and in various meetings that we've had when it comes to our budgets. Starting in the fall of last year, the state economic forecast began forecasting a shortfall in state general funds and lottery funds, and because of that, we were required, along with all other state agencies, to submit reduction lists totaling 5% of agency allocations for general fund and lottery fund. And we submitted those to the legislature for potential use, for them to potentially use or to consider using during the short session to help balance the state's budget. So that was a process we went through with all other state agencies. We did receive a small reduction in the 26 legislative section to our general fund. It was $159,999. That was all captured in agency vacancy savings, so savings generated by holding positions open. So a small reduction that really we could absorb internally. Just to let you know, like 5% of the agency allocation for general fund in this exercise is about $3.75 million. So though we'd rather not have any reductions as associated with legislative session, was pretty pleased just to have about $160K that we could absorb. And through that process, we did not have any lottery fund reductions. We didn't have any other reductions other than that piece. Also included in the 2026 session adjustments were what's called the salary pot adjustment. So these are cost of living increases that weren't a part of the legislatively adopted budget that was approved in the 2025 session. Those cost of living allowances are generally approved after the budget is built by the legislature in odd number of years. And then typically, those adjustments are approved after, approved during the short session. And frankly, given the projected shortfalls for general fund, lottery fund, we were a little concerned that we wouldn't receive this go around, but we did. So all those, that's my summary, that all those increases, those were an increase in limitation, as I said, to account for an increase in cost of living allowances. That's all incorporated into our budget from the 2026 session. So that really serves as our starting point for where we start 27-29 budget development. Little budget 101 for you folks. It's probably a lot of old news for you, but to create your budget, you start with current service levels. So CSL, that is all currently funded programs and positions moving forward to the next biennium with an inflation factor. Then you add in your investments, which are your policy option packages, which includes things you want to do differently or actually bringing in new funds and new programs to the table. And then you minus your reductions. So part of the budget building process is reductions if there's reductions needed to balance, expenditures with revenues. You add all those three together, and what spits out is really your next biennium's budget. So starting point here, this is where we'll start the process of building out our current service level budget here later this week. Okay, so let's go over the outlook. I kind of went over some of this earlier when I talked about the level setting that occurred during the 2026 legislative session. But the general outlook for general fund and lottery fund, I'll just say that through that 2026 budget balancing process, general fund and lottery fund are balanced across the state, but the outlook is really tight. So if you listen into the state economic office, they're looking at 27, 29 and beyond, and their revenues for lottery fund and expenditures for lottery fund, revenues for general fund, expenditures for general fund are really tightly close together. So not a lot of extra to be had. So the outlook for those fund types is that they're going to continue to be constrained for this biennium, next biennium, and perhaps beyond. And so what that means is we can maybe expect some continued funding challenges, and in the very least, can't expect a whole lot in the way of new funds available for new programs or services. So that's just specific to general lottery funds. But the outlook for those, I would say, in general, is just it's tight. It's very tight. And so we'll talk a little bit more of how that shapes our 27-29 budget here in a little bit. All right, so switching to federal funds. So as a lot of you know, federal funds are really important for ODFW's budget. In total, federal funds approximate about 34% of our overall budget. And these are comprised of a variety of fund sources that fund core programs like hatcheries, monitoring, habitat restoration, hunter and angler access, wildlife area operations, and other things. And an important component of our federal funds is funding derived from the federal sport fish restoration and Pittman-Robertson tax. These are funds appropriated to ODFW from excise taxes derived from the sale of ammunition, firearms, and archery equipment for Pittman-Robertson SPR, and excise taxes derived from the sale of fishing equipment and a portion of gasoline tax attributable to small engines and boats. So if you couple these funds, federal SFR and PR funds, with our recreational and commercial license sales, in total, that encapsulates about 40% of ODFW's budget. So these funds are appropriated to ODFW based on a calculation that includes the number of unique license buyers that we have in the state, and we receive an appropriation each year. So we're just highlighting this on the graph to show a very important fund source for us and how it kind of very you'll see on the bottom is our Pittman-Robertson. Actually, we have those backwards. Apologies. Have those backwards. I'm not sure how that happened. So on the bottom is actually sport fish restoration funds. On the top in blue is actually Pittman-Robertson funds. So as you'll see, sport fish restoration funds on the bottom, largely flat, maybe slightly increasing over time, a lot less volatility. And then on the top, we have our Pittman-Robertson Act funding, a lot more volatility. This is the one that's derived from the sale of ammunition, firearms, things like that. We'll see certain things happen, and then sales will shoot way up, and then we're right now, as you can see, kind of in a downward trend. So just highlighting this as an important fund type for ODFW, something that's also tied very much to consumers and our hunters and anglers out there. Nothing here screams that we're going to have to make adjustments right off, right? Even with the downturn in PR funding here in the recent couple of years. That just means a little less flexibility for us in the short term, but something we're definitely be monitoring long term. If that continues to have a steep downward trajectory, then it's something that we're going to have to be looking at very closely. Similar for SFR, we feel pretty good about where we're at, but flat funding, as you know, with inflation, doesn't necessarily keep you whole, right? And so, like, we continue to see SFR apportionments relatively flat, if not, raising a little bit each year, but generally not keeping pace with inflation. So it's, again, something we're keeping a close eye on when it comes to agency costs for those fund types in accordance with how much we get. And then I'll just say, and I'm going to speak to this a little bit later, just massive continued uncertainty with some of our other funding agencies, like NOAA, which funds our Pacific Coast Salmon Recovery Funds, Mitchell Act, Pacific Salmon Treaty, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Endangered Species Act funding, and some of our other federal sources. I'll speak to this a little later. But across the board, we're seeing, we haven't seen impacts to those fund types, at least from our permanent programming standpoint, but just a lot of uncertainty. I'll speak to that a little bit later on how it just is something that, keeps us up at night. All right, licensed dollars here. Any questions thus far? Happy to jump in on any questions that folks have. Seeing none. Okay, here's where I get to talk about licensed funds. And so license funds make up the bulk of our other funds portion of our budget. Obviously super important to what ODFW does. This is where I just want to stop and say we went through a huge effort in 2025 to get a fee increase bill approved by the legislature. And a lot of folks in this room, online, were just a huge part of that. Massive stakeholder support down at the Capitol. I just can't thank the folks in this room and online enough, and our stakeholders everywhere for the support that you all provided for this really important funding package. Obviously critical to maintain our operations, and it was just really heartening to see all around at the Capitol, just the support, and I just really appreciate all the work that you all have done on our behalf on this effort. So big thank you for the license funds and the fee increase that happened in 2025. And I'll talk a little bit about what some of this means, but on the screen here in yellow, you'll see our license fund revenues dating back to the 2015-2017 biennium. In blue, we have our license fund expenditures dating back to 2015-2017, and in green, this is our unrestricted cash ending balance dating back to 2015-2017. And this is one of the most critical pieces of how we manage our budget. So I mentioned our federal funds, and they make up a big portion of our budget. What some folks might not know is that we basically bill out for all of our federal work. So meaning we have to do the work first, we have to pay our staff, and then we submit a bill. So we basically have to float all that work on license funds. And so in order to make sure that we stay safe as an agency, we have to carry a decent amount of ending balance. We see a couple months of where the feds don't pay or something happens and something's frozen, right? We can really see our operating reserves tank. So starting back in 2013, 2015, we had a little lower. We had some budget challenges. We went through a fee increase exercise that was approved in 2015. And also at the same time, we had an audit by the Secretary of State that recommended that, ODFW, because of your reliance on federal funds, you really need to be carrying an operating balance in your unrestricted cash for 3 months. So from 2015 on through the 1921 biennium, we really took intentional efforts through that fee increase to build that imbalance. So you see that here with our revenues consistently higher than our expenditures. That's an effort to build that operating reserve. Then we get into here. Because of that, no fee increase needed in 21-23, no fee increase needed in 23-25. But what we see is because of inflation, just in rising costs, our expenditures actually cross that threshold of exceeding our revenues sometime in the early 23-25 biennium. And then our actuals here for 23-25, we see that our revenues in yellow actually were about $10 million. It's hard to see they're about $10 million below what we spent. But now here's where I get excited, okay? So we did all that work, we knew we needed a fee increase to keep us whole. But the fun part here going forward is we were in end balance building mode here. We've done that now. We've built our end balance. Now the key is sustainability, okay? So how can we as an agency sustain that end balance and make sure that our expenditures, our revenues are matched up over time? We went through an exercise that was a part of our fee increase package in 2025 to look internally at agency license expenditures. We cut $8.5 million of license expenditures. And you'll see that as a result here, this curve is somewhat flattened between 23-25 and 25-27. That's a result of us cutting some costs. At the same time, our fee increase rolls in 2026, 2028, and 2030, and we see those closely mirrored up. So you'll also notice here that, the expenditures, continue to be a little bit above the revenues, and that's a little bit by design. So there's a couple things here. So this model really assumes worst case scenario. here. So this is built into some assumptions that, everything that's allocated in our budget for license fund, we spend it 100% out. Well, history tells us that, that due to some intentional actions, we try to save license fund where we can. And we typically spend anywhere from 80 to 90% of our allocation in the budget on license fund. So that right there can make up for some of this gap. And then we can't rely on this long term, at least in the very short term. Interest rates remain to be pretty high, and our interest rates can help maintain a balance within our ending balance. And I don't think I said it, but this end balance is really made up of non-dedicated license funds, indirect charges on federal grants, and interest. That's really the solution the formula that makes up this end balance. So, that's my very long-winded way of saying that I feel good about where we're at with license funds. I probably could have said that. I feel good about where we're at with license fund, but similar to the general fund, lottery fund conversation, feel good, but there's not a whole lot of extra there. So through our efforts last biennium, we really tightened those up, expenditures versus revenues, and so we feel good about where we're at through at least 29-31. But also doesn't mean there's a whole lot extra there that we could go and build a new program on or anything like that. Like carrying forward today through 29-31 at current service level, those revenues and expenditures are pretty well married up, and we think because of that, even though our end balance is showing kind of on a decrease, I'm really hoping we can flatten it out and maintain about 3 months of operating reserve or $50 million for the next couple biennium. Questions there? All right, I'll keep rocking. But Ken, where do you spend your license funds? That was a question I was hoping I'd get. So I have a slide for you. So through this process, right, a big spotlight on our license funds and just obviously, for good measure, right? Like we went through the process of getting a fee increase, and through that process we've been asked a lot, but where do you spend your license funds? And so this is a shot that we put together to show you all exactly how we spend our license funds. And these are actual expenditures based on 23-25 expenditures, so expenditures that occurred on license funds last biennium. And our accounting system and budget, like we list things separate ways, but we really try to boil it down to these main categories. One, and the big one, is population monitoring and management. So $65 million of licensed dollars were spent within this category in 23-25. That's your boots on the ground, folks that manage fish and wildlife out in the field, our district biologists, our regional staff. These are our statewide monitoring and management programs, Fish Division, Wildlife Division, headquarters. These are kind of the bread and butter biologists that are doing work all across the state. Next big category, I'll go clockwise here, operating fish hatcheries and wildlife areas. So about $20 million in total there, $15 million for hatcheries, about $4.7 million for wildlife areas. Debbie said earlier, 32 fish hatcheries, 200,000 acres of land. I forget exactly how many named wildlife areas, but a lot. So we have license funds that go to those that obviously provide a really good, really good return on investment for our anglers and hunters. And one thing I wanted to point out that I think is really important to think about in the terms of our budget is hatcheries. So it might surprise you that only $15 million in license is spent on Oregon's fish hatcheries. That total budget for, that total expenditure, I don't have it for 23-25, but the total budget is close to $100 million for hatcheries. 75% of our hatchery budgets are federal funded. Not a surprise, the Fish Division in the back. But I mentioned that we're going to keep talking about this with federal uncertainty and whatnot, but just something that's really important with our hatcheries is the bulk of that is federally funded. We just see a small portion really. Whoa. Are we? I'm just making sure, are we okay? All right, okay. All right, got it. Sorry about that. So yeah, just a really important for our customers, stakeholders, everyone to think about in terms of our hatchery system. The bulk of it federally funded. We are reliant on those federal funds to operate those fish hatcheries. Restoring Habitat is a combination of our programs in Habitat Division and then some regional wildlife biologist positions out in the field, about $3 million. A bulk of our habitat restoration spending from Habitat Division comes from the general fund, so just a small portion of that from license. And then another big one, enforcing fish and wildlife laws. Our Oregon State Police Fish and Wildlife Captains on the call here today. Obviously, just a huge part of what ODFW does is our partnership with OSP to enforce fish and wildlife laws across the landscape. $31 million of our license funds were spent on OSP fish and wildlife enforcement for 2023-25. And then just because I couldn't leave it out, there's some other kind of miscellaneous categories that didn't really fit neatly into those buckets that I wanted to call out. One is angler and hunter access and enhancement. This is really boils down to two programs, so recreation and enhancement grant program and our access and habitat grant program. These are programs that utilize dedicated license funding to provide on-the-ground benefits for hunters and anglers, enhancing habitat, access, and just opportunities for the public. $7.7 million spent in 23-25. Agency and administration, this includes our central services, director's office, credit card fees, licensing, various internal programs that keep the agency running. And then we have these other ones, state government service charges. We have about, I actually forget in 23-25 what it was, $15 million that we pay Department of Administrative Services, Secretary of State, other state agencies for services that are part of our budget. We pay a portion of that with license dollars. So $4.4 million spent on state government service charges in 23-25, and the last one is debt service. We'll talk a little bit more later today about some of the investment packages we're proposing for 27-29 and what we received in 25-27 and prior. But we've been intentional about going after general obligation bonds to fund capital improvements. With that, we have to pay back those bonds over time, and that's called debt service. A small portion of our license funds on an annual basis goes to debt service charges. So that's how we spent our license dollars in 23-25, and we're in the middle of 25-27 now, but I would expect it to look very similar, albeit with inflation, just a little bit higher in each one of those categories. Okay, talked real quick on 25-27 investments. But I want to highlight a couple here that are just really important for, framing up how we're going to move forward in 27-29. Just talk about how we're implementing these currently. So the big one, first off, that we received during the legislative session in 2025 was an investment in our hatchery infrastructure that we've never seen before. Maybe never has happened, at least not in recent memory, but a $20 million investment, general obligation bonds, capital bond funding, to fund investments in hatchery infrastructure. This package was approved by the legislature to increase resiliency of our hatchery system. And these funds will target the highest priority projects identified in the recent independent review of our hatchery system. Like I said, this is a really key component of us as an agency being intentional about our infrastructure needs and ensuring that to be a resilient and sustainable agency, we gotta have resilient and sustainable infrastructure, and of that, hatcheries are just a really critical piece. So the $20 million investment in hatchery infrastructure received in the 25 legislative session, and then we also are investing in agency infrastructure in general, so our office buildings. We have a lot. If you've ever traveled out in the field to our ODFW offices, we have a lot of offices that are, the old farmhouse that was deeded as part of the property, that we've turned into an office that seats 17, 18 people. We make it work, but offices have a lifespan, and just with how closely we've managed our license funds over the years, right? Like we've let, we have a lot of offices out there that are kind of at the end of their useful life, and as we look at meeting the needs of our customers and our staff, we've really taken a look at each year, looking at our agency office infrastructure and seeing where we can make investments to improve that. One of which last year is capital bond funding, general obligation bonds, $5.25 million to go to our North Willamette Watershed District office in Clackamas. Clackamas is, what is that, a 100-year-old facility. Pretty cool if you ever get the chance to go down there, but a lot of the buildings, small buildings at the end of their useful life, this is just critical to meet the needs of our staff. I think Clackamas is also our biggest office, field office in the state, about 100 staff, multiple programs, not just district staff, but Columbia River program. And so sorely needed infrastructure improvement at our Clackamas office that, again, will meet our needs better and better meet the needs of our public. We're gonna break ground on that project here later this year, so super excited. And again, a big investment from the last or the last legislative session is $5.25 million to go to that project. And then I'll just talk about chronic wasting disease preparedness. And we have this up there as, A, it's critically important, but this is something we heard specifically from all of you as something that was of concern and that we needed to make sure we were ready for. So because of that, we built into our 25-27 budget increases, and we used funds from licensed funds, from our fee increase package that would up our ability to surveil, monitor, track, provide faster in-state testing, and improve coordination with partners when it comes to product wasting disease monitoring. So these upgrades are being implemented now to really help Oregon build a stronger early detection system to protect our deer again.
Ken?
Yes.
I might just give you a break and talk a little bit more about a couple of these.
That'd be great, Sean.
So the hatchery infrastructure investment, that was really the culmination of a year and a half long process that involved a lot of the stakeholders in this room, external contractors, where we took a deep dive into our hatchery system, state hatchery system, and looked at what challenges we're facing in terms of rising costs, deferred maintenance. Some of these facilities are like 100 years old, as well as challenges of changing climate, increasing water temperatures, fire, etc. We learned a ton from that project. I think the full report's about 500-600 pages long, full of data. And we also had some really great conversations with stakeholders about how you use that to go about building a resilient system. Some of the key findings were that system does provide a lot of social, cultural, and economic benefit. I think it's on the order of $55 million per year in economic benefit to Oregon. And that's on the investment you see there, about $15 million in license and about $9 million in general fund per biennium. So it's a pretty significant benefit, but it has a lot of challenges. And we estimated in 2024 dollars, it was over $200 million need. Based on that and all that information, this $20 million bonding package was the first of what we hope is several packages to invest in the system and get it where it needs to be going forward so it can continue providing those conservation and recreation benefits. For this go around, we're looking at investing it in Cedar Creek and Elk River primarily, and then Bandon Hatchery we're still working on plans there. When we looked at Bandon Hatchery closely, the need there dwarfed what we had to spend. So that then led us to let's really work on Cedar Creek and Elk River, increase the flexibility there, increase their climate resilience. In the north, Cedar Creek's one of the key systems for the Northwest system. So we want to build out some additional capacity there and put in some shading and some other kind of systems that will increase that resilience. Similar at Elk River, that's really key to the Southwest system operation. It's key to our ability to operate that conservation program, the Coquille. And then Bandon Hatchery, we're probably going to take an iterative approach there where we look at some of the water supply issues first and then maybe come back and look at some of the other things. But if you want to talk more about that, Tom's in the room. He has more of the details than I do. And then CWD, as Ken mentioned, that was really something that was driven by our engagement with you all in the last budget go around for 25-27. Where you wanted to see more investment in surveillance and on the ground kind of preparedness. As we all know, with all these things, the earlier we can detect it, the more options we have for management. And CWD is surrounding Oregon now. I think it's in all the states around us. We've been lucky we haven't detected it yet in Oregon, and so we really wanted to ramp up our surveillance with you. This was a close to $1 million package that's allowed us to hire more seasonals, to convert some stuff to permanent, and give us capacity for more check stations, more ability to work with meat processors and taxidermists, and then we're looking at some more rapid in-state testing so we can get turnaround quicker than for the out-of-state testing. So that's going on the ground, and we've already seen a jump in our ability to collect samples and turn them around. So really, on all these fronts, deep appreciation for the folks that brought these forward and also helped us get them through the legislature. And Bernadette's here if you want to talk more about the CWD, Bernadette Bryan.
Thanks, Sean. We'll speed things along here a little bit. So now I think we all have a pretty good understanding where we're at the current 25-27 biennium. We framed up, some of the outlooks for various fund types that we have in the agency. Also wanted to call out outlook as it pertains to increasing costs and uncertainty. So first thing I'll highlight here is just biennial increases in some S&S costs. So one thing that we've been paying close attention to in our fish division is the cost of fish food and then utilities. So some of that, fish food's been in the news, utility costs definitely in the news, going up across the board. Something we monitored really closely. We did receive an exceptional increase, inflationary increase package for these two items, fish food and utilities, in our 25-27 budget. So after a quick review of where things are at, we're not seeing cost increases to this level in 25-27, so that's a good thing. But we are wary into something that we're just going to continue to monitor as it pertains to our fish hatcheries. If these costs balloon, they can really get things out of whack quickly in our hatchery system. So again, not as big a concern right now as it has been in the past biennium, but something we're going to continue to monitor. Another one would be legal costs, Department of Justice costs. We've really seen our costs associated with legal fees increase in the past 6 years, particularly as it pertains to litigation. We do have a small amount of funds that is budgeted into our budgets for legal, but it hasn't been enough to cover the increase in fees, and in a lot of cases, right? These are things that we're going to continue to So important things, right? Like something that we're not going to walk away from. We're talking about the river and some really important things going on out there. But our litigation is really, we've seen an increased amount of litigation the last couple of years, and our legal fees associated with it have really gone up. So something that we're really watching really closely, mostly within our fish division, but as the agency in general. And I mentioned this earlier, and I'll just circle it. Things that keep me up at night, there's a lot, but federal uncertainty is one of them. As I mentioned, our federal funds are just key to our core programs within the agency. And that uncertainty kind of hangs over our heads a little bit as we move forward. Like I said, we have not seen any direct reductions in our current funding, but if we did through, the budget build process, which is really starting now for the next federal budget, see a decrease in some of those funds, there'd be some pretty strong consequences. So it's something we're going to continue to pay close attention to, monitor, and can communicate with folks on what we're seeing about at any time. But just this federal uncertainty and the roller coaster that's been the last year or so, and what I think is going to continue to be a little bit of a roller coaster on the federal side for the foreseeable future, this continues to be something we're going to monitor closely. All right, I think last slide before I hand things back off to Debbie, but I mentioned we received budget instructions from DAS on March 17th. Reason why I waited until the end of this little portion to talk about what those instructions said, because the outlook for each one of these fund types kind of frames up what our instructions are, and there really shouldn't be too many surprises here. The first main instruction, there's more than this, I mean, it's like a 70-page document, but the 3 takeaways are that any general fund and lottery fund policy option packages must be self-funded. So I said several slides ago, the outlook for general fund and lottery fund, not great, in the very least constrained. So not seeing opportunities to make new investments in those fund types. So our direct instructions were no new general fund or lottery fund packages. If we do propose the general lottery fund package, it needs to be self-funded, meaning we're taking an existing program and repurposing it for something else. And then in addition, proposed investments are budget neutral, so we can't ask for more revenue. So anything we put into our budgetary request, we have to have identified that revenue source and have that revenue source secured. And then just in general, a big one that is kind of always core to what we do is focus on maintaining core operations and customer service. So those are the three main bullets from the DAS exercise or DAS instructions. With the big ones being that, hey, we're not gonna see any general fund packages from ODFW, not gonna see any lottery fund packages from ODFW or other agencies because of some of this direction. So, so pretty strict on where we're going with the budget this go around. And I'll, with that, if there's any questions when it comes to, all right, James.
So the, two slides back that have the cost increase, kind of buckets.
Yeah.
For, it said SNS operations, is that the same as the?
Nope, great question, should not have done that, used acronyms, it's service and supply costs. So the state, there's several categories in which we get budgeted. PS is personal services, SNS is service and supply, so that's basically like the funds we can use to buy stuff. PS is like funding staff and people. So SNS would be, yeah, like that's what we would use to buy fish food or pay utilities, that sort of thing.
Gotcha. So in that study that was prepared around the hatchery program, and I guess this really applies to many of your facilities, it was their examination of, through resilience, looking at solar storage or generation at those sites. Because when you guys, for hatcheries, you need a lot of water. And you're probably pumping some water in the pipes. You can do some, mini and conduit hydroelectric stuff. Was that ever examined in like the future plans for hatchery facilities?
Yeah, there was a component of it that looked at, where there's gonna be some increased energy needs for like maybe chilling or recirculation, rather than relying on the, kind of power supply, looking at solar as powering that. And so we had a small contract with a firm that looked at optimizing that solar generation to match it up with the energy needs of the facility. But then separately, we've already been working on some of these ideas about in-conduit hydro and solar at our facilities, like the Trust, for example, when we built that new hatch house, the roof was covered in solar. It's to the point where we're putting as much back into the county supply as they'll let us. In Clackamas, I think you're probably aware we put a pipeline through to the reservoir at North Fork, and we're looking at putting in conduit into that, which would then generate enough electricity to supply the whole hatchery as well as sell back. So there are places where we're trying to do that and build it out as we make these investments, for sure.
Great question.
Then I have one follow-up.
Sure.
On the litigation side of things, is enforcement built into that?
Yeah, question, I think you're loud, is enforcement built into litigation? No, it's not. That's a separate line item. So we have a contract with Oregon State Police, and so that $31 million that I highlighted, that's the contract that flows through OSP. So if there's DOJ fees or costs, that's a separate line item in the budget.
Peggy's got a question.
Yeah, Peggy, I see Peggy's hand up.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry I was late. I want to follow back to the SNS stuff, and I think that Ken said that personnel costs aren't a part of that SNS. So what's the percentage of increase you're going to have to figure out for personnel costs?
So, yeah, any trends on that front, Ken, in terms of personal services inflation and?
So personal services inflation, so based on the DAS budget instructions, some of the overlying theme that they wanted us to use is like 11.5%, which is really high. That's not actual though. So for how we build out our budget, it's called the current service level budget. So all of our positions are gonna be frozen here in the state system. DAS is gonna take a snapshot of where we have positions filled, at what level, where do we have vacancies, and then they take that information and they apply a inflation factor that I believe is standard at 4.9%.
I think, yes.
Yeah. So DAS provides an inflation factor, and then that's built into our current service level budget. So, forecasting to be a little higher this go around as compared to some of the past biennia, I would say, just with inflationary costs and whatnot, but I can get back to you, Peggy, on like what we're seeing for actual numbers, or expected inflation, but it's, in 25, 27, we're gonna see like just from COLAs, like 7-8%. It might be a little higher, moving forward in 27, 29, but we don't know some of those actuals until, some decisions are made down the line.
Did they answer your
But
question,
I think it's important for people to know about that, though. I think that didn't seem to be a part of the presentation. I want to make sure that people understand that that's another expense that's gonna have to come in that doesn't do us any good if we have a zero-sum game budget. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Peggy, and that's a really good point in that, that CSO budget building process, personal service costs are ODFW's biggest costs. So the cost of salaries is our biggest cost. As we see inflationary increases, we see cost of living, right? There's increases to our program expenses across the board, and that will have to be incorporated into our budget. And then that's where our review of our revenues comes into place to make sure that we have adequate revenue to support it.
Any other questions, comments? So we just kind of talked about kind of the instructions from the governor, and the DAS in terms of how we build our budget and kind of set the stage for kind of why are we getting that kind of instruction given the outlook for the state's budget. But there's a little bit more context that's statewide and then specific to ODFW that we want to talk about. At a statewide level, many of you have heard about the governor's executive order 2526, which is really, for us, as we build our budget, this is important context for us. Not because it represents new resources for the agency as we build our budget, but it's a really important lens that we'll be applying. And frankly, it's the way that we've looked at our mission, and so it works really well for our agency. And this was an executive order that really asked the state natural resource agencies to kind of lean in together in terms of, resilient lands and waters. What are the attributes, going through a process of identifying the attributes that make up resilient land and waters, and then thinking about how we take our existing capacity as agencies and advance more lands and waters that have those resilient attributes. And so that's a really important lens that we're gonna be applying just in terms of just our existing capacity and as we think about our budget going forward. And then the other important context for ODFW as we build our budget. Now we get to the celebration part.
Yeah, as we think about building our budget for the next biennium, it's really hard to go past talking about House Bill 4134, which passed a little over a month ago, which is hard, it feels just like yesterday. And I just wanted to pause on it because it really is an historic advancement for conservation in Oregon. We're now one of the few states in the nation that have figured out how to provide dedicated permanent funding for conservation. So it's really going to change the way we do things here in Oregon. And this really came about from the work a lot of people in this room and online did. And I wanted to take the time to say, one, thank you from the department's point of view for all that work. I know it was a huge lift. And then two, just give you an opportunity to say anything you wanted to say about it. Amy, Srishti, Danielle, Kyle's gone, others? Colin. There was so much that had to happen for this to pass. Like it got closed last long session, didn't quite get there. Y'all did a huge amount of work in the interim there. And just so many things had to come together for this to pass. It's kind of a once in a lifetime unicorn thing, really, in Oregon. So I don't know if you want to say anything about it, and I don't want to put you on the spot if you don't want it. Just an opportunity to say thanks. Looks like no takers on that. We'll carry on. But again,
A round of applause.
yeah.
Let's do it. Yeah.
We're pretty excited. We haven't, as a team, had a chance to sit down and celebrate yet with spring break and everything. And now we're in the mode of just running to build the budget for next session. But at some point, it'll be good to sit back with you all and take a moment on this one.
I think just really quickly, I would just like to highlight the leadership from Danielle and Tristy and the really hard work that Colin put in on all the data and the paperwork and all the facts that he provided us with, like very, very quickly when we needed it as it was evolving, but also just the absolute breadth of the stakeholder, the coalition. We had I came to call it like every, what do I want to say, the full spectrum of the conservation organizations were all on board, and I think that's what helped us persevere after the near misses. But yeah, it was a pleasure to work on and a pleasure to work with all the stakeholders.
Right back at you, Amy, and thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to just echo the collaboration and everyone giving it their all. It was very apparent, and I think it was very apparent for legislators. We heard from so many that of all the legislation that was moving, they heard more about this bill than any other piece of legislation. So it makes me feel good that wildlife, for once, is a very prominent feature of the Oregon legislature. So thank you to everyone, and yeah, giving it all your all, and hopefully everyone's taking a nice break to rest up for the next thing.
What's the next thing? Okay, so for those of you that maybe weren't following this closely, we just want to lay out kind of where things landed in the bill here. So there are several places the money's going to be invested. One of the biggest components is implementation of State Wildlife Action Plan, which is 29%. So overall, it's a 1.25% increase in the TLT, transient lodging tax. 0.9% of that is for the implementation of this law. There's three other areas where it's going to get invested in ODFW, and we'll dive into these in the next slide too. One of them being wildlife connectivity, another being stewardship. This is really kind of building out the policy option package that we had in maybe even as far back as 23, 25. Had a policy option package around this.
It didn't get funded.
Didn't get funded, yeah. This is kind of Bob Zellinger's legacy policy option package for you. And then permanent dedicated funding for the Oregon Conservation Recreation Fund. I think you all know that program has been struggling for a little bit here. It's been added some lifelines in the legislature, but it's always like biennial to biennial. So this is permanent dedicated funding. And then also for DOJ and OSP, we had an anti-poaching program that was put in place by the legislature a few biennia ago. That was on general fund. It's been perennially on the reduction list just because there's not that much general fund in our agencies, so these are places you have to go. Given the importance of that, this establishes, again, permanent dedicated funding for those programs so that we're not subject to those reductions of general fund anymore. So that's a really good enhancement. And then for ODA, two areas of investment. One is the wolf compensation program. So this is like the statewide program that is going to provide compensation for producers that have been impacted by wolf depredation, as well as providing funding for non-lethal assistance to proactively prevent depredation. And then that's about 3.1 million of biennium. And then about 1.2 million to the Oregon Invasive Species Council. This is going to enhance the statewide efforts to monitor early detection for invasive species like mussels, etc. And then help organize the state response if we do get a detection. So it's pretty significant investment there. And then the last one is this wildfire risk reduction. It's an investment in the Oregon Conservation Corps of about 0.1% of that, which is going to go towards reducing the fire risk around communities, businesses, infrastructure, that kind of thing. So pretty good investment there too. So I just wanted to dive in a bit more on these investments in ODFW specifically. There's 4 areas there. The wildlife stewardship investment, that's about 1.2 million per biennia. It's going to increase over time, as are all of these, because it's essentially indexed to the price of lodging. And we'll talk a bit about what that policy option package will look like in the next slide too. Then the next one is wildlife connectivity. So this is connectivity broadly. Think wildlife crossings, virtual fencing, habitat improvements for connectivity. It's really connectivity focused. And it's the first kind of permanent dedicated funding we've had for that in the state. So really big advancement there. And then, as I mentioned, mentioned OCRF, 3.1 million of biennia there, increasing biennially. This is permanent dedicated funding again for that program, that it can continue to do all the good things it's been doing. And then the biggest portion there, about 55.7 million in the first biennial, increasing over time, is for recovering Oregon's wildlife, essentially SWAP implementation. And so as we think about that piece in particular, if we go to the next one of the things that we talked about during the legislative sessions is that we have the recipe for success when it comes to conservation. It's not rocket science. We centers around the no plan do framework, where you have the science and information gathering to tell you where the species are, what their status is, what the limiting factors are, and what their habitat's like, and what you need to do to address it. And then you take all that information and you incorporate it into plans. So what do you need to do? Where do you need to do it? And you develop projects to address those limiting factors. That's the planning. And then the doing. When you think about the way the agency is structured, as Debbie talked about earlier, like boots on the ground, people out there, they're doing habitat restoration, they're doing habitat protection. That's what it's going to take for conservation and recovery of a lot of these species, really boots on the ground doing protection and restoration work. And that's in the doing bucket. And again, all of this is done in partnership with a lot of your organizations and a lot of other folks that are not represented in the room online today. So as we think about developing a budget package for that pot of funding, this is the framework and the lens we're looking at it through, like the no plan do. So we go next. So I'm just going to touch briefly on these are the policy option packages that we're currently scoping as part of our budget build out for 25, 27, 29. Living in the past, thinking about the future. Ken's going to talk about most of these. I'll just cover some of the TLT related ones. The stewardship policy option package, again, we've had a package for I think the last 2 biennia. So it's largely going to look like that again. This is something we've worked with a lot of you on. The concepts include some biologists in our urban areas like Portland, Eugene, Corvallis, Salem area that can help with the stewardship of wildlife in these urban areas and really increase our capacity to work in urban areas. It also includes funding for rehabbers, so some pass-through grant funding there. We've heard that there's a lot of challenges in maintaining these facilities and there's not many funding sources. So we're really looking to front load a lot of the grant funding into this stewardship program for rehabbers in this first go round for a couple of reasons. One, we will be accruing some revenues in the first part of next year from this tax, and we can put some of that money towards rehabbers and granting programs. And then 2, it'll take us some time to hire people once we get the approval from the legislature. So that first part of the 27-29 biennium, we can really put into some of those rehab grants. So that the concept there is pretty straightforward. Some biologists for our urban areas, rehab granting, and then there's 2 other components to it. One is education outreach. Really, it includes a position for, not a position, but it includes funding for outreach materials, public campaigns, etc., that we can do, kind of run education in some of these urban areas. And then the other component is a wolf biologist. So around the state, I think we have 4 wolf biologists currently. Wolves are dispersing across the landscape, and so there's a need for us to provide more support up there for producers, and this provides additional capacity. I think we're looking at putting this position down in Plymouth. So that's the stewardship policy option package that you'll see more details on in the near future. The connectivity package, that's also pretty straightforward. $3.1 million in the first biennia. I've had some conversations with some of you about what that might look like. It's going to be pretty straightforward in terms of, in general, the majority of it will be going to be made available for grants or SNS to do these kind of work, on-the-ground work projects, either virtual fencing, crossings, structures for amphibians to get through culverts, those kind of things. And then a small amount of it will be set aside to facilitate the work group that's been set up through legislation last year of NGO partners that are working on connectivity in Oregon. It's a jointly managed work group between ODFW and ODOT, and the facilitation for that work group is going to be funded by actually the Wildlife Foundation for the first year, and then we're looking to pick that up through this fund for the subsequent couple of years. So pretty straightforward policy option package, and we'll be sharing more details on that in the near future. And the OCRF part, that's again $3.1 million in the first biennium. That will be pretty straightforward, just grant funding going into that program with some small amount of administrative support to run that program. And then there's the big one, Recovering Oregon's Wildlife. That's the $55.7 million policy option package. That's one where we are running full steam. I've been meeting with a lot of you folks who have reached out to me. A couple more meetings scheduled in the near future, and if anyone wants to talk about this, feel free to get in touch. Internally, we've also been meeting with the leadership and with our field staff to think about how you put this money on the ground in a way that achieves the outcomes everyone's looking to see. So more to come on that. That's going to be the biggest component here that needs to get looked at.
You know, I think kind of from, our perspective, the swamp implementation money, we're not seeing it as just kind of building out a siloed program. Because it's dedicated sustained revenues, we really see it being integrated to our agencies so that we can finally have the capacity to uplift all species across the entire state. And so, so we're really gonna be looking to extend the model that maybe has applied to more game type fish to make sure that we have the equal footing and capacity to be working on some of these other slop species that we just have not had in the past. So we really see it as a pretty substantial change for our agency and how we do the work on the ground. And regardless of where that capacity shows up, we see just tremendous opportunity to uplift all species. I mean, it's just good for all species.
Just curious, how much funding from the 25-27 biennium is being already utilized for the swamp species and implementing that current plan? Just correct me if I'm wrong, it's already being implemented a little bit. Is there a budget line item that you guys have that'll offset?
Yeah, it's about one something. Bernadette, what is our SWIG funding?
SWIG specifically, so we get federal funds, the state wildlife grant, so that's the primary source of funding for swamp implementation, and then we match that with lottery bond funds. So this would, I can't remember the exact number of the SWIG funding off the top of my head, maybe like 5.
I'm thinking 5 million, but we can get back.
Yeah, we can.
Well, I'm just curious, like 5 million plus
That's too high.
55
Yeah.
now? Or will it?
Yeah, it's really hard to pin down because you've got the dedicated swing funding, but then we also have some general fund in our field positions so they can work on game species, and then you have programs like the lottery that funds some of the native fish investments, and then the marine program does some. So it's kind of just
But it's depending on how you count it. I mean, we're talking like 10% of the 55, right? So, and even the federal funds that are the SWIG funds that are the core federal funds, I think those are zeroed out in the.
They're zero in the current president's recommended budget.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. This is a substantial increase. Yeah.
So the entirety of the 55 million, are you envisioning that it will just go towards position? Is there any funding that would go towards existing grant programs or?
I think that we're really, I mean, again, we're moving fast and we're trying to have a lot of different conversations, but we're not seeing this just being built out as agency staff. We really want to make sure that we have sufficient funds to do projects with partners. So as you think about kind of our wildlife diversity biologists that, are currently funded, we have maybe 4 of those statewide. If we're gonna have more of that kind of capacity, how do we make sure that they also have the kind of funds that will help them to fill gaps, work with partners and others to fill some of our data gaps. We have like 100 species that we don't even have enough information to classify whether they're at risk or not. And enough money, that goes with them that they can add more MODIS towers or do projects on the ground to benefit species where we know there's need. Same thing with habitat bios, how do we make sure that if we're adding capacity, we're also adding some funds to do projects with partners and landowners and, other entities. So it'll be a mix, and that's kind of what we're trying to work quickly. And it's the first biennium, so we'll all learn and grow, but, we wanna make sure that as people see the first round of what we're proposing, that it makes sense, right? And you're like, okay, we understand how this is the right formula, the right mix of activities and funds that is the best way to start really implementing the SWAP in a big way.
So I was just gonna, so our annual SWIG amount, the federal funding is just over $1 million, but the total program for the whole biennium is about 3.5 million, a little higher than 3.5 million.
Yeah, so the federal funds is like 1.2, right? And then you add in some of the lottery stuff that we've done, so. Game changer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking for sure more than that.
Sorry, you were gonna.
I was just gonna ask a follow-up, which is, how can partners best engage in this as you kind of work it out, and then kind of timeline? I know we have this 27-29 budget process that you're kind of doing at the same time, but just as far as implementation of this new tranche timeline-wise, does it have to be in line with this 27-29 timeline?
Yeah, for us as agencies, the only way that we can kind of expend funds is through budget approval. So for the TLT funding, any of that we want to use, we have to go through a budget process with the legislature to do it. And so we are on a pretty fast kind of timeline to put some meat on the bones, and happy to engage one-on-one with folks, come into different kind of settings that you may be hosting where we can talk through kind of what people are thinking about, what areas they think that we need to start our focus with. It is a pretty fast timeline. The good news is that, we do have a recipe for kind of how we think conservation works well. We know it's worked in other species, and we have our state wildlife action plan, which just officially got approved by the federal government last week. So that news release is going out today. So, it's not a blank sheet of paper, and there's been a lot of history of conversations that we're benefiting from. But we've got a hand up, Joseph.
Oh, thanks. You talked about learn, plan, do as sort of the framework for this and spending this money. I'm just curious if you're thinking about sort of how it's divided between those three aspects of conservation. Do you want to make sure you're sort of evenly divided? So, I mean, you could probably spend it all just on studying things or just doing things, right? But do you want to make sure it's proportional, or is that sort of a something that guides you as you think about how to apportion this money?
I think that we're not really starting with any kind of sense that it has to be proportional per se. But we are recognizing that we may need to build some capacity in some areas. So like when we think about the no, we have not been collecting huge data sets on these 300 at-risk species. And so, you might see us kind of start by saying, hey, if we are gonna start being in the business of creating those data sets, how do we do that well from the outset? Maybe we take, we've got a lot of data around a lot of game species that if you had a blank sheet of paper, you might do differently today, and lessons learned. So it could be a different mix, at least initially, in terms of those three categories. But definitely, we're not waiting to get perfect science to get the work done on the ground. We know a lot about the work that needs to get done. So there's no doubt the doing is gonna be strongly represented, and we're just recognizing that some of the knowing we don't have that capacity today, and we're gonna need to build that out. Does that answer your question, Joseph?
It does, and I like the answer. Thank you.
So to your point, Kendra, if you, our door's open, if you wanna reach out to me during or after this meeting, we can set something up. I've met with a lot of folks already that have reached out, and as Debbie said, it's gonna be fast moving, so we wanna get together in the next week or two. We can discuss this. So I'm gonna turn it back to Ken, but James.
So congratulations on the state wildlife action plan, it's really exciting. And so that was just completed in the past 2.5 years. And I'm assuming there's a lot of conversations and outreach across the community, you know, about the areas of, I forget what they're called, opportunity areas. So was there a lot of conversations had that kind of would lead to, okay, here's some real opportunities that we can get going with community stakeholders, relatively fast, given resources?
Absolutely. I mean, there are things that we already are doing, but just at small scale, that we could go faster in some areas. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna, just talk about a couple of other policy option packages, that we're, developing preliminarily, that follow those overall, budget instructions we received, budget neutral and/or, the big one is if we're adding something, have the revenues identified, so all these, at least, the majority of them, we have associated revenues, for those projects, and I'll talk through each one of those a little bit. So on the species resiliency box, we have the shellfish population survey, so this is utilizing, other fund license, these are dedicated license funds that go to our shellfish sub-account. This is actually one of the dedicated funding accounts where we have a decent ending balance, and there's, through our projections, we are showing enough revenue to support some additional staff to really help with this really popular, activity. So looking at, different population habitat surveys, and then outreach to the public with these staff. And I forgot to mention that I do have, as we talked about, we do have agency leadership and division leadership in the room here and online, and they've done all the heavy lifting on these policy option packages thus far. So if there's questions I can't answer, I might go to one of them. I'm sure they can answer for you if there's questions. We have another small package, Hood River Steelhead Monitoring, that utilizes other funds. These are grant funds from the city of Portland and Hood River Watershed Group to monitor steelhead within the Hood River ecoregion, so Sandy River and Hood River basins. So we have that on there. We have a fish screening and passage lottery bond package. So yeah, for folks that were involved in our 23-25 and 25-27 budget development, this mirrors a package that we had in those budgets, which is lottery revenue bonds to be used for infrastructure associated with fish screens and fish passage out on the landscape, $9 million in last biennium that our staff and program are currently working through, so something potentially very similar to that in the 27-29 budget package. Moving to resilient infrastructure, this is gonna be a theme that we see throughout the biennium here for the next several, is continuing our efforts to work on our hatchery resiliency. So we're going to put forward another policy option package that utilizes other fund general obligation bonds to improve hatchery resiliency across the state. And then another 1 or 2 packages for capital construction ODFW offices. So very similar to what I talked about with our North Willamette Watershed District office. We have a couple other offices that are next up on our list, one in Redmond, which will be a new office that's gonna consolidate like 3 or 4 different offices throughout the Bend, Redmond, Pineville area into one new state-of-the-art facility that will better meet our needs. And the second being Central Point, our office down in Central Point. This is another one of those, actually the exact example I was talking about when I talked about the old farmhouse that's converted to agency offices. That's the next one up on our list on West Region for improving our internal infrastructure. And then hatchery system resilience, investing in a sustainable hatchery capacity for the Umpqua Basin. So as a lot of you are probably aware, in 2020, our Rock Creek hatchery was destroyed by a wildfire. We have received an insurance payment for just under $17 million associated specifically with Rock Creek hatchery, and we've just been kind of sitting on that for the last year and a half. As we've further kind of developed plans for what we're gonna do in the Umpqua Basin when it comes to our hatcheries, working really closely with, the Cow Creek tribe down in the basin on developing sustainable hatchery, infrastructure in the Umpqua. We're getting closer to knowing what that might look like, so pretty exciting. And so this is a pretty robust package that we think by sometime in 27, 29, we might actually start breaking ground on some construction and kind of rebuilding the production that was lost at Rock Creek Hatchery. So this will be complex, involve federal funds, FEMA dollars, insurance funds, and some other little bits and pieces there. So a big one here for the Umpqua Basin. And then we have a few continuations and miscellaneous items carry over from last biennium. One is aquatic invasive species position. We combined two positions in the 25-27 budget. And this continuation essentially makes that permanent. So that's gonna be in there. Budget, we have the funds, it's just making the position permanent. We're also gonna continue our hunt by reservation program. This is a limited duration position that we've had to run that program for the last 2 or 3 biennia. This continues that for 1 more biennia. We have some federal funds. Associated with sorting fish at our Lieberg facility. I think some federal funds and then some other funds to continue a position that's been limited duration for a couple different biennia. These funds, this is captured secured funding would make that position permanent, something that's needed there in the basin. And then seasonal Sabi wildlife area parking. This uses other funds, licensed parking revenue. So we have very popular beaches at Sabi Island Wildlife Area that get overrun in the summer. There's safety issues, there's natural resource concerns, and so we are gonna be pushing forward a package to make this basically a controlled entry, or more controlled entry during the summer months. And by utilizing a new parking pass to be used at the beaches in the summer. And this will take that revenue and basically hire a couple seasonals to be able to actually operate what we're planning to do. So pretty small, but important for the Sabi Island Wildlife Area, and our neighbors on the island and our law enforcement partners. So pretty short list, in regards to some of the things we've seen in previous biennia, like I said, with some of the limitations for general fund, lottery fund, you're not seeing any new packages there, so some continuations, and then a couple big ones when it comes to just our infrastructure in general, and of course, the transient lodging tax program. So any questions on our preliminary policy option packages?
Well, maybe just anticipating some questions around the hatchery system resilience fund. We, I think, folks are aware in that short session, we gave an update to Ways and Means on where we're at with that process. And there really hasn't been, at least Tom and Mike, to my knowledge, like, we haven't progressed further on solving some of these key issues there in the last month or so. So there's still some significant challenges there. We're getting closer to figuring out like the infrastructure solution potentially. But folks are probably aware that there's no funding in our current budget for permanent operations at that facility. We received a $1.2 million investment in the long session last time, but it was just for this biennium. It wasn't permanent investment. And so one of the key things we're gonna have to solve is like that long-term operations, and that's why you see a TBD there. We're not quite sure how that's gonna play out. That's something that Tom and the Cow Creek tribe are gonna be working on. And then there's a whole lot of other moving pieces with FEMA and things that have to get sorted out. So I guess there's still a lot of things that have to come together for that to work, and that's why this is really a placeholder to give us time to work through that. But what you saw in the Ways and Means is kind of where we're at currently.
My question was just gonna be around, like, is that operation cost or the 17 million?
It would be
placeholder, will it be 2 different pots, or will it be all packaged in one sort of thing?
Yes.
Yeah. In the way it's written here, it anticipates it all packaged as one.
Oh,
And so, yeah, and that might change, right, based on our work with Dash, the governor's office, but, right now it's always one, and we call that out specifically one time versus permanent operational funding in the policy option package.
And in the future, you guys will build the operational costs into your standard budget, or will it just continue as a pot of every biennium?
So great question. So the way the POP is written, if it moved forward and we crossed all hurdles between now and then, what we signified in this policy option package narrative as permanent funding would become a part of our permanent budget going forward, and we wouldn't need to go back for more every biennium. So that's a key piece, is that operational funding that becomes permanent as a part of this.
The other thing I should just mention, we are also still hopeful that our agency will receive some of the Monsanto settlement funds that were kind of earmarked for agency activities. Those are gonna, go through the Environmental Restoration Council, over the next couple of months. And so, we're hopeful that we'll have a POP that reflects whatever is approved for us, from that source of funding as well.
Any other questions on these packages? Oh, we got, is that James Frazier?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. I have a couple thoughts, but they're not strictly about the ones that are on the list here already. There are some sort of additional ideas. Do you want me to hold those for now?
Go for it.
Okay. Well, thank you. There's a lot of really exciting information and ideas here. As ODFW staff know, when it comes to your budget, we've been pretty focused as an organization on the Klamath fishery introduction and related projects for the past couple of years. And there's a whole lot of important existing work and positions in your budget that we want to continue supporting moving forward, including that, the water program, and so on. But when I look at this list, especially the species resiliency portion of it, there's two things that my colleagues have been mentioning as something that would be really helpful. And one of them may actually sort of nest under the fish screening and passage one. I'm thrilled to see that on the list, by the way. That first tranche from a couple years ago went towards a lot of really wonderful projects, and I know it's for brick and mortar infrastructure. The idea I have is sort of fish screening, fish passage, but it's more of a position. So the two ideas, first would be a seasonal fish screen maintenance person in the Klamath. Everyone's heard, I think, about how quickly those fish have responded to the dam removals, but also some of the unintended places that they've ended up. And we certainly need more fish screens down there, but in some places there are screens, yet it's difficult for water users to keep them properly maintained during the busy season. And then if a screen gets gummed up or covered in debris, it gets pulled and might sit dry for a bit. So the first idea would be a seasonal ODFW technician for 5 or 6 months a year who just kind of goes around and makes sure that fish screens are working, that they're turning, that they're in the water, that they're clean, and just keep all of those reintroduced fish out of the ditches. Probably not something that can be funded with lottery because it's a person, is my understanding, but I wanted to throw that up on the wall. And then the second one would be an ODFW flow restoration person focused on building out voluntary transactions in Northeast Oregon. Trout Unlimited has been doing a lot of those deals like in-stream leases for years, but in places like the John Day, we do see that lack of in-stream flow during the summer continues to be maybe the #1 limiting factor for wild spring Chinook and summer steelhead. So we'd be very interested in seeing a POP or some sort of capacity for an ODFW in-stream flow project person who can complement and build out some of those deals alongside TU staff and the other folks that are doing them out there.
Appreciate that. Those will be ones that we would love to talk to you about some more, James, and kind of maybe think about some creative approaches to how we might get both of those funded.
Thank you, Director Colbert, and I'm also glad that you, mentioned the Environmental Restoration Council, because that was the third thing I was gonna mention. My understanding is that the first tranche of project awards this year is gonna go to the E-Board for approval, and I will be curious to see if that is how it works for the rest of the biennium, or if it somehow becomes part of the budget building process for your ARV this biennium or in the future, but, I know we're all figuring that out together at the same time.
Thank you for your engagement on that front. We really appreciate it. Other thoughts in terms of kind of building out the budget?
Yes, I was curious about Good Neighbor Authority, as an opportunity to propose it out to them. I know we have staff that,
Sarah, can you speak to kind of what's happening with Good Neighbor Authority these days?
Yeah, just as a reminder, Sarah Wright, Habitat Division Administrator, and thanks for the question, Dave. You know, when Ken talked about the federal funding uncertainties, that goes for Good Neighbor Authority funding as well. It's been a few years now since we've seen them offer up funding to go toward a position or capacity to help coordinate all of that work. Those were good days when we had that. It's hit or miss. It seems to be when the local forests and districts within the forests have some leftover available funds that they'll call us. We do still have a handful of Good Neighbor Authority projects that are either in implementation or are still rolling in, but it's very difficult to predict, and it's really kind of just one-off projects that show up. Our regional habitat program staff are the ones that are taking the lead on implementing those, along with our natural working lands staff in Habitat Division. So we're keeping those projects afloat. We're saying yes when the offers come in, but we've been unable to build anything programmatic on Good Neighbor Authority for a few years now.
Does that answer your question?
Sure.
I mean, we still have it in our current,
you had, I was wondering about funding, going, not waiting for federal funds, but using some of this kind of money for projects on federal funds.
yeah.
I mean, certainly the some of what Debbie was talking about in terms of wanting, for example, if we were to put new regional habitat staff out there or existing habitat staff, giving them the funds to be able to work with partners to do projects, that could be on any land ownership. That could be on private lands, that could be on federal lands where there's an opportunity. And in that case, you just wouldn't use the Good Neighbor Authority, because that's a mechanism for the federal agencies to give the state agency funding to do work on federal land. Doesn't mean projects aren't gonna happen on federal land, they just wouldn't be GNA.
Well, since we're mentioning things that we want, I just would like to say that Wild Salmon Center really appreciates the department's work for restoring coho on the coast. We love partnering with you all with the SAPs. Excited to work with Tom and staff, but we see there being a need for a little bit more capacity at ODFW to implement some of those SAPs and help support the department there. So we're willing to help out with whatever way we can to get some more funding for a position on the coast that can help with that. And we're really excited to work with Tom and everyone else in the Fish Division on that. The other thing is just the monitoring on the coast and maintaining the current monitoring that we have for salmon steelhead, as well as the monitoring on the south coast. Making sure that we're getting adequate data, and if we're not, then how are we adjusting the current monitoring programs and having the funding to make sure that we implement that monitoring year after year to get good, adequate numbers for managing fish populations down there.
Appreciate that.
In that vein, could you provide some more context on what the river steelhead monitoring is all about?
guys behind you there.
Yeah.
Jeez.
For everybody, Tom Stahl, Deputy Administrator for Inland Fish. So that's money we're already getting but don't have positions for. We're gonna have to make do, so we want some permanent positions because we're getting funding to monitor the steelhead populations in the river in the Sandy. So it's just getting the position authority. It's not asking for state dollars for anything. So there's a lot of restoration work going on there. So important to understand how the populations are reacting, both the Sandy and the Hood. So that monitoring goes to inform restoration.
That's great. And where's those funding sources? In City of Portland and River Watershed Group?
Yep. And I think Hood River probably did the whole.
Anybody online have any kind of other thoughts or questions for us?
Seeing none, we still have 10 minutes left, so we'll sit here and answer questions as long as folks are asking. We'll just end with the process slide again. Like we said, this is not the last opportunity to engage. We continue on engagement on our budget throughout the process, so please do reach out if something comes up, you have questions, we're all happy to chat with you at any time. And I'll just say, like, I talked about the cookbook, or the formula, if you will, for the budget. So it starts with our current service level. Those are our permanently funded programs, positions moving forward with an inflation factor, that's personal services, and our services and supply funds moving forward, plus our policy option packages that we just talked about. And then the third one of that is reductions, and don't see that here, up there in the presentation. As I said, with our fund types, like, we're hoping that we're gonna kind of stay the course and not need to adjust. There's still things that we're working on, and one of the pieces that we'll go over on May 12th is the development of our agency 10% reduction option list. That's a list that all state agencies have to build every biennium, including their budget package, and that provides reduction options for the governor, for the legislature to potentially take if needed to balance the budget. So that'll be something that we'll be working on over the next month that you'll see at the May 12th meeting. And like we said, continuing the development of these concept packages, working with the governor's office in DAS, and we'll have more to share at a later date. So with that, as I was rambling there, any other thoughts or questions come to mind, in person or online? And while folks are thinking, there was a couple that came in online related to they're both fairly long, but related to communication for TLT, and if we have any plans to, how do we plan to engage with all Oregonians when it comes to the availability of TLT and its funding, and if we will be appropriating any amount or devoting a fraction of the funds to invest in public education and outreach for the general public across Oregon. So 2 questions related to communication, if we'll be incorporating any external outreach funds within TLT, and how we plan to in general communicate across all Oregonians.
I think we've got a couple of ideas along those lines. I do think that we would like to have some communication capacity here at ODFW to communicate the work that is going to be done using these dollars, and kind of just continue to educate around our at-risk species. We also, and I hope I don't put them in the hot spot, but we're also talking to the Oregon Zoo and seeing if there's an opportunity with this funding to work with them on additional outreach and education campaigns. I mean, they're really good at it. I have a 17-year-old that I still am not allowed to have palm oil in any products because of the orangutan exhibit at the zoo. And so it's something they're really good at, and so we're talking to them about, is there some capacity we might want to think about leaning into their expertise and the tremendous number of Oregonians that experience the zoo and learn about species. So, those are just some of the initial ideas that we're having, but certainly communication and outreach, I think, is going to be a piece of the proposed policy option package. Hopefully that was looks like maybe Brian came off of, Brian, did you have a question or comment? Sorry. I have half an idea. I was gonna say half an idea because it just came to me here. Yeah, half Or an idea. a suggestion. I don't know if it falls under will fall under the TLC funding, but I think as we are all seeing that, energy siting, land use, issues are becoming more and more prevalent, and having ODFW, as a presence to be able to give, as you were saying before, give the input on that, increased ability or capacity in that staffing, I think is something that will benefit us all long-term, being able to add some capacity around those particular positions, and I believe those are in the habitat division. I just see that as a issue that's gonna continue to put pressure, on our wildlife, on our fish species, and that all the stakeholders, I think, are probably pretty engaged around those land use conversations. So if there's a way to build out kind of that section of our capacity, at the agency, I think that's a good investment. Appreciate that.
Potential concept for future TLT funding for monitoring wildlife, seal and sea lion monitoring on the Columbia River, potentially. That kind of information is a major part of how the state can deal with predation on salmon going upstream. And I don't believe there's a ton of current people employed or in a position to do monitoring in the state. So this group would have to.
You wanna speak to kind of how it's currently funded?
Yeah, I'm just racking my brain on that, because it's changed over the years. So we have a marine mammal program, based out of our marine program. I think they have a combination of, is it general and licensed ones?
Mostly general.
Yeah. And they work coastwide as well as in the Columbia River, and they have kind of two roles. One's the monitoring role, so they do annual surveys along the coast, and on some of the offshore islands. They also survey, the Columbia estuary, like East Mooring Basin, that area, to get a kind of account in the estuary. And then we're working, in Willamette Falls and Bonneville specifically on the removals there, but also monitoring and counting. So they do a weekly survey of the Willamette River, and we get counts of what's in there, and then they're surveying at the Bonneville, and then together with Washington, they're also surveying around like what's the term, the Longview, Cowlitz area. So there's a fair amount of monitoring that's going on in those areas that helps us guide where we're gonna do removals, but also like how is the population responding, how are removals impacting the sea lion populations on the coast, etc. But it's a good point.
And I think there's continued discussion, with other states, like Washington, around additional federal funding that we might be able to secure. So that's another source of revenue that we've been kind of working toward, those efforts. I do feel, I'm looking around this room and I'm thinking about how many, I mean, it's like, we're so fortunate to have folks that are so engaged with the work we do and care, and such great partners. But it is interesting because I think some of y'all could give major portions of this presentation, right? Like if, something happened, we could be like, hey, can you give this budget presentation? And so many of you, and Peggy, I include you on that short list. I feel like you know our budget so well, and you've been such active and continued supporters and advocates for Fish and Wildlife. And just the fact that you show up for budget presentations is, really demonstrates that. So I guess kind of just to round it out, if there's no other thoughts, just don't hesitate. Like we're in one-on-one, we're in talking mode. So don't hesitate to reach out, let's talk. And then we will be back together in May. There'll be more meat on the bones by then, so you'll see more materials come out, kind of written materials. Peggy?
I just wanted to make sure that earlier today, one of the other league volunteers, Melanie Moon, has been working on your budget issues and, made comments on the swap and et cetera. I am hoping that she will be someone that you will get to know, and work with along the way, and thanks for your kind comments otherwise. And thanks to all your staff for today's presentation.
That is such a great shout out to Melanie, and we do look forward to spending time, Melanie, and if there's any kind of one-on-one conversations you wanna have over the next couple of weeks, don't hesitate, but, really appreciate both of you.
Thanks, Peggy.
All right, any final words of wisdom from the group?
Thank you all, greatly appreciate it, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks everyone.